Alright, what's up guys? This video is going to be an overview of this. My prototype power management system built with a Raspberry Pi. Basically what this does is it allows me to turn off and on my server and see whether or not it's on just with a push of a button. And it runs off of a Raspberry Pi 4. So right now this is a prototype, but for my final build, I plan to incorporate all of these miniature Raspberry Pi projects I've been working on into one Raspberry Pi that is always on and does everything. So that way I don't have to waste a bunch of space having all these one-off projects. So this video is going to serve as an overview of the project, and then in my next video I'm actually going to go in depth, as I usually do, step by step of how I actually built it. But because this was a pretty big project, there's a lot of one-off steps that have to get done, and it's not going to be that interesting unless you're actively building along with me. So first off, what is it? Well, basically, it's a Raspberry Pi with 3 LEDs and 2 buttons hooked up to it. The 3 LEDs are for status. The green light tells me whether or not a server is connected, a blue light means a command was sent successfully, and a red light meant that there was an error. Then the buttons are very simple. The red button turns off the server, the blue button turns on the server. This is all done over the network. So all I have to do is if the server's on, shown by the green light, I can press the red button to turn it off. Then I wait a minute and it successfully turns off. Then if I want to turn it on, I simply hit the blue button and it sends a magic packet that wakes up my server. So right now, I've got this implemented on my DS1819 Plus. But the final build is not for that server. As many of you probably know, Synologies are incredibly low powered, and you don't really need this. This was all built because I'm planning on buying a Dell PowerEdge used. I'm going to be getting one of the newer models, so it's still not going to be that big of a power draw, but it's still going to be a lot more than my Synology, and primarily, it's going to be used for either testing, or when I need it, a high-speed file server. So 90% of the time, I'm most likely not going to be using it. And so because of that, I wanted an easy way to always tell whether or not the server was on and to be able to turn it off, all at the push of a button. Alright, so overall, the project's actually pretty simple. It's just one Python script that I wrote that has primarily 3 core capabilities. The first is to tell whether or not the server's on. The second is to turn on the server. And finally, the third is to turn off the server. The way that I tell whether or not the server is on is incredibly simple. I just ping the server every few seconds, and if it responds, it's on. If it doesn't, it's probably off. And I turn the light on or off accordingly. Turning on the server is actually not much more difficult than that. Synology, and just about every other server built, has the capability built in for what's called Wake-on-Lan. Basically, that means that when you turn your server off, the LAN ports that you choose stay very slightly on and listen for a very specific packet to come to them. This is called a magic packet. If they get it, they turn the entire server back on. This is great because it allows you to turn off or on your server remotely entirely. So you don't have to go down to the server room and physically turn it on. For this project, I'm using EtherWake, which is incredibly easy to use. I simply give it the MAC address of the NIC on my Synology that I've got set to Wake-on-Lan, and when I push the button, it issues the Wake-on-Lan command, and a few seconds later the Synology starts booting up. The third and probably most difficult functionality that I built in was to turn the server off. The command itself is very simple. It's just a sudo power off now, issued over SSH. But the hard part of that is getting that to be done without having to enter any passwords. So because I'm issuing this command over SSH, generally I would have to authenticate that I am that user by sending my password. Instead, I'm using what's called SSH keys. Basically, instead of sending a password to authenticate SSH, I send over a special key that's saved as a file. And the server reads that and says, oh yes, I do know that Will is authenticated, and therefore does not need a password. So that solves the problem of having to enter the password for SSH. However, it does not solve the problem of the command shutdown now requiring root access. So the way I went about doing this was to edit the sudoers file. Warning to anybody who's about to do this, be very careful. I actually nearly bricked my Synology while editing this file and had to fix it. I'll go into it in more detail in the next video, but be very careful and make sure you do everything properly because you can really get yourself in trouble here. But by editing the sudoers file, I was able to give the user who was logging in over SSH from the Raspberry Pi root privileges just to issue the shutdown command. This meant I did not have to enter an additional password to use sudo on this command. But it also had the added benefit of not giving that user unlimited root access, because the last thing you want is an automated system having root access to your entire NAS. That is just a recipe for disaster. And so after developing those 3 core capabilities, I slapped some LEDs and resistors and buttons down and hooked it up into a big function and had it run. And it actually runs really well. Every time I press the red button, it sends the sudo shutdown now command over SSH, and without having to enter any passwords, it shuts down the Synology. Then, when I'd like to turn the Synology back on, I simply hit the blue button, and it sends the magic packet using EtherWake to the Synology NIC that is controlling Wake-on-Lan, and the Synology immediately starts booting back up. It's a great way to save power. This is going to be especially true when I get my PowerEdge, as I'm going to be using that for testing and such, but I'm going to keep my Synology as my main always-on file server, as well as any automation stuff that I need. However, on the PowerEdge, I am planning to link aggregate multiple 10 gigabit connections and have a huge RAID SSD pool, so we're going to see what kind of read-write speeds we can get with that. And so it'll be a really high-speed, high IOPS NAS whenever I need it for video editing. Alright, well that's it for the overview. Stay tuned for the next video in which I go over in-depth step-by-step on how to do this. And like and subscribe and put in the comments what else you'd like to see me make. Alright, have a good one. Bye.